for us as well. No one ever said that we blame for no good reason. Even the girls in the McDonald's lawsuit had struggles and determinants that were making self-control difficult for them. There's no doubt about that. Perhaps they felt ashamed, powerless, or afraid. Anyone who thinks they are going to help an overweight person by just saying, "It's your choice, stop eating," has either never been overweight or has never worked with many overweight people or addicts. External factors do influence our behavior. Even the Bible affirms that. But the fact that there are reasons that drive us to do things and the question of whether or not we are responsible for what we do with that are two very different matters. The bottom line is this. No matter what reason drives someone to overeat, whether it's stress, McDonald's advertising, boredom, lack of education, a bad childhood, or whatever, there is still a reality. If you overeat, you will gain weight. The why you did it, no matter how valid, will not solve the problem. The same thing happens in people's lives every day. When we succeed in blaming someone for our problems, we still are no closer to a solution for them. Still, we do it anyway to make ourselves feel temporarily better. And when we do, we still have the problems. If these girls had won their lawsuit, it would have been the worst thing that could have happened to them, for it would have reinforced the belief that someone else was in control of their behavior. Thus, it would have gotten them no closer to solving their weight problem. It may have helped the girls feel better in some way to have been awarded a big settlement for McDonald's having made them fat. They might have temporarily gotten over some bad feelings about being overweight. I don't know them, so I can't say. But I can say one thing. They would not have been one step closer to being a normal weight. Not 1 ounce. Not 1 fraction. Why? Because they are the only ones who can do anything about the real problem. They are the only ones who can refuse to eat the burgers. They are the only ones in control of that. And in the end, it is all about control. Who ultimately has it? As we shall see, that is ultimately the only thing that matters. It is all about control. I know a man whose childhood was not the greatest. His mother used him for her own needs, and his father did not provide the crucial support to give him confidence to accomplish his dreams. In very real ways, he was shortchanged. Now he works at a job that he doesn't like, and he dates a woman who treats him much like his parents did. She uses him and is not supportive. Every time he thinks about his hated work or his poor relationship, he reacts in a familiar pattern. He gets bugged and complains. None of his problems are his own fault. He complains about how the company doesn't care about him and how they use their employees for their own ends. And he complains about how his girlfriend thinks only about herself and how she always gets her own way. When I asked him about looking for a new job, he said his girlfriend had a lot going on right now and he spends so much time helping her that there's little time left for job hunting. Plus, he said, they really aren't hiring in my field right now. What about another field? I asked. What about your interest in computer science that you told me about? Well, I'd have to get another degree, he said. Yeah, so why don't you do that? I asked. Well, you know how the schools are with mid-career people. They don't like to admit students into those adult programs without experience in the field. The ones with the experience are the ones who get the spots, he said. Thus, the conversation continues in an endless circle. Finally, I give up. Poor guy, I think to myself, he is stuck in a prison. But the thing about his prison is that he is the one who holds the key, and yet he doesn't know it. He is the one in control of his life, and yet he feels as if everyone else is. He is the only one who can do anything about his problems, and yet he is the one who says he can't do anything. From his perspective, his troubles are not his fault. If only his girlfriend would become less needy and demanding, or if only his company would care and do more for him, or if only colleges would get more understanding. Only then would his life ever be different. It's always up to someone else to make it better. And since they don't, it gets no better. Now, if you were to ask him, he would not say this outright, but that is, in effect, and that's what's important here, the effect, what he is saying and living out each day. For if his girlfriend, his employer, and the college are the reasons that things are not better for him, then his only hope of anything ever getting better is that they change for him. In his mind, they have all the power and control over his life. The overweight girls had the same attitude. If McDonald's made me that way, then my only hope is for McDonald's to do something to make me different. Well, guess what? Neither McDonald's, my friend's girlfriend, his company, or the colleges are holding meetings right now on how they plan to make these people's lives different. The people themselves are the only ones who can do that. Now, compare this. I have another friend from a similar background. Very little support, encouragement, or help from her family. They hurt her in two ways. First, by the various harmful things that they inflicted on her, and second, by depriving her of the good things that she needed. But her reaction was quite different from that of the first friend I mentioned. Somewhere along the line, she learned the difference between what happens to us and what we do with it. She learned that it's not the bad things that happen to us that determine our destiny, it's how we respond to them. She learned that no one can have control over your life if you don't let them. In short, she learned that she owns her life, not someone else. And it is the owner who has the rights. She learned that if her family did not provide the support and validation she needed, she was free to find it from other people. And she did. She joined a spiritual community that loved her and supported her. And from that base of getting help, she grew to be emotionally strong. Although her parents inflicted lots of emotional pain on her, she learned that she was free to find help in dealing with that pain, to learn new patterns of relating, and to get well. So, she diligently went to sustained therapy, joined support groups, and overcame the significant pain in her life. Today, she is very healthy. Although this woman's parents did not support her intellectual pursuits in any form, including financially, she learned that she could make her own choices and take responsibility for those interests herself. So she got jobs, paid for school, and eventually achieved a graduate degree and became a professional in a high-paying field. This woman also learned that no matter how hurtful one's relationships may be in early life, in your adult life you can choose relationships with people who will not be hurtful. She chose to marry a good, honest, and responsible man. Even though God did not instantly deliver this woman from suffering the very moment she prayed, either in childhood or beyond, she learned that she did not have to choose to believe that He's not there or does not care just because healing is not instantaneous. Instead, she chose to believe what He says about our living in a world where people have freedom and choices, and sometimes they use that freedom even to hurt us. She understood that God is not to blame for that. As a result, she kept alive a faith that led her to many experiences of His intervention, healing, and deliverance. She did not become bitter towards God, or, like the Israelites facing the difficulties of the desert, give up her faith and abandon God. Instead, she became one of those who followed Him through the desert to the Promised Land. And in what I think is her greatest achievement, this woman learned that although your own parents might not give you what you need in life, you do not have to continue that pattern and pass it on to another generation. Instead, she gave her children great parenting, and they grew up to be healthy, responsible people. Her life did not belong to her circumstances, her parents, her lack of resources, or her lack of options. Her life belonged to her. It was a gift from God, and she was not going to allow what had happened to her to be in charge of the rest of her life. Just because how she was treated was someone else's fault, which it was. She did not wait for someone else to make it better. She owned her life. Even if she didn't cause the problems, she was proactive about solving them. She was in charge of what went on from that point forward. That was the difference between my two friends. One was a perpetual victim, and the other was a victorious person. What is a person? In the beginning, the Bible tells us that God created people in His image, Genesis 1:27. This means a lot of things, but one thing stands out as it relates to our present subject, and that is the ability to choose what one wants to be. This ability to choose is what is referred to as will. Literally, the term will means desire. But for humans created in God's image, it means much more than that. The animals have desire or appetite, but only humans have the ability not merely to desire things, but also the creative will to take responsibility for that desire and bring about the achievement of it. That creative ability resides in the nature of God, and He has passed it on to us. Your dog is pretty much going to live where you decide he will live. But you, being human rather than canine, have a creative choice. God has delegated two things to you: the ability to create and respond to life, and the reality consequences of those choices. Often you cannot choose what happens to you. Bad things happen. You cannot determine which cards you are dealt. But there is one thing that you can always do. You can always create, seek, and find a range of options to determine how you will respond to what happens and how you will play the cards in your hand. Adam did not choose how many trees were given to him in the garden, but he did choose which to eat from. The girls in the lawsuit did not choose for McDonald's to make and advertise food that could make them gain weight, but they did choose how they were going to respond to that advertising. My first friend did not choose parents who taught him what non-supportive relationships were like, but he did choose to find a girlfriend who was like them. Furthermore, he chose to allow her non-support and self-centeredness to control his life. He also chose to stay in the state that his family left him in rather than make an attempt to grow out of it. It was easier to blame than to change. As a result, he was choosing his life one sentence of blame at a time. We do not always like the enormous freedom to choose that we actually possess. It frightens us. It makes us responsible. But it is a reality. That freedom to choose is the element that explains the difference between my two friends. Both were from difficult backgrounds and faced difficult obstacles. But the way each chose to respond to those circumstances was very different. And their different choices created very different outcomes. Each of us faces difficult circumstances in life. God grants each of us talents, brains, and abilities with which to meet them. And then He gives us the choice as to how we will respond. He gives us enormous freedom and responsibility. Listen to how this delegation of responsibility is described, even from the beginning. Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the beasts of the field and all the birds of the air. He brought them to the man to see what he would name them, and whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. Genesis 2:19. Now think about this. God did not name the animals for Adam. What He did do was give Adam the creative ability to come up with options and name them. Had my first friend been the one in the garden, he might have said, "Well, that's just like God, isn't it? Tell me to name all these creatures, but doesn't even provide me with a list of possible names. How am I supposed to do this? He's so non-supportive. Maybe I'll sue him for a non-supportive work environment, lack of training, and poor employee assistance." That's very much like what the loser in the responsibility lottery said in the parable of the talents. Remember the story? The master gives 3 people different amounts of resources to invest. The first 2 make their investments and get nice returns. The master rewards them with more resources. But the third was like my first friend. He blamed the master for not giving him what he thought he needed to make it work. So he did nothing with what had been entrusted to him. Listen to his words. The man who had received the 1 talent came. "Master," he said, "I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you haven't sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you." His master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant, so you knew that I harvest where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed? Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Matthew 25:24-30. Now notice something. God didn't say, "What are you talking about? I haven't been mean to you. I've given you everything you needed to be successful with your talent." Nor did He say, "Gosh, you're right. It's tough to only have 1 talent. Here, I'll do your work for you." Neither what God had given this man nor what He had not given him was the issue. The issue was just one thing. What had he done with what was given to him? How had he used it? How had he responded to the options that were available to him? Had he tried his best and failed, he would not have been graded on the failure. He was graded simply on whether or not he had acted responsibly with what had been dealt to him. When the man made excuses, accusing God of harshness to the point of expecting too much of a person, God could have said, "No, I'm not harsh. I do not ask for a return where I have not given anything. Didn't I start you with 1 talent?" But he didn't say this because the issue was deeper than whether or not the servant had a good excuse. In fact, God's answer to the man recognized that his excuses may have even been real, but that didn't matter. He said that even if those things were true, the man still should have at least done something. At the very least, he should have taken responsibility and put the money to some kind of use. In other words, there is no excuse. Perhaps our excuses may somewhat define and describe our options, but they do not do away with our responsibility. We still have the freedom to respond to whatever comes our way, whether we get tons of talents or only 1. All of us have certain areas in our life in which we only get 1 talent, and those are the areas where also we will be the most afraid to make a positive choice. But God has designed the universe in such a way that He expects us to use the freedom He has given us to take responsibility for our situation, find the possible options, and respond to them. And the results of our choices will simply be what they are. He does not always shield us from bad results, although at times He may. Most of the time, He allows us to reap the rewards of our choices, whether positive or negative. He will not smile indulgently at our foolish choices and think He's responsible for bailing us out. In fact, that was part of the devil's temptation of Jesus. Satan told Jesus to just jump off the high precipice and not to worry because God would save him. He even used a Bible quote to back up his temptation. But Jesus came back with a very firm reinforcement of the principle of responsibility. It says, "Do not put the Lord your God to the test." Luke 4:12. It's not an act of faith to fail to take responsibility for our lives and then think that God's somehow responsible for the outcome. It began with God giving Adam and Eve a paradise, along with the abilities to rule it, and then holding them responsible for what happened. That was simply the created order of things. And that created order still remains, although it's marred and mixed up by sin. God gives us a life and various degrees of resources to manage it and to cope with it. Sometimes He allows bad things to happen, but then offers us help in other ways out of or through the difficulty. But even when He helps us and gives us resources, He still requires responsibility from us to live our lives by making responsible choices, and the results will always testify to how well we make those choices. This is not just some brand of theoretical theology. If you don't believe me, step on the scales and look at reality. McDonald's or not, the scales don't lie. Our lives weigh in at what they truly are. Reality is what it is. And much of what ultimately constructs that reality is our own choice. Much of it is up to us. How we give away ownership by demanding that life be fair and just. When we think of the terms just or fair, we are thinking about the way life ought to be. The dictionary defines just as what is right or deserved. When you say, "He got his just desserts," you are saying he got what he deserved in the situation. He got justice, and justice is one of the most important concepts in the universe. One of the hallmarks of a spiritual person, according to the Bible, is practicing justice and seeking it for those who are not getting it, especially for those unable to seek it for themselves, the oppressed. But the very reason that God asks us to seek and practice justice is that we live in a world that does not operate justly. The stark reality is that the world as we find it today is not a just or a fair place. It does not operate according to the rules of how things ought to be. People often do not get what they deserve. In fact, people often get terrible things they don't deserve, awful things that hurt them in significant ways. That is the reality we encounter in this world. And part of believing in God and serving Him is to make right anything we find that is hurting someone, thus dealing with this harsh reality. People who own their lives own them in reality, not in the fantasy world of the way life ought to be. That means they take ownership of their lives in the world that is, not the world as they wish it were. They own the fact that we live in a world that is neither fair nor just, and they deal with that reality. They do not spend a lot of energy protesting that unfair reality, demanding that the world be different. They deal with their world as they find it. As a result, they are effective in finding solutions to life, even when life has dealt them hard realities that just should not be. Other people, however, do not face reality so realistically. They refuse to own their lives in this world in which they find themselves. They want a different world, one that is fair and just, where people do what they're supposed to do. They want a world where people treat them the way that they are supposed to be treated, and where good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. That is fair, and that is the way it should be. Oh, that's a wonderful wish. That kind of world was God's desire from us from the very beginning. But that is not the world as it is now. God came to grips with the fact that sin had messed up the created order, and He offered forgiveness to imperfect people, along with a chance for them to work through the unfairness and injustice to achieve a fulfilling life. But some people never get it. They never come to grips with the fact that the world is no longer perfect. They still want it to be perfect, and they sit around protesting the fact that it's not. They blame others, sometimes even rightly so, for their situations. It's truly not their fault. And while they waste time thinking about how life ought to be, they remain stuck with the problems because they will not deal with reality as it really is. But effective people are like my second friend. They desire justice and seek it. But when it does not show up, they do not remain stuck. They get active and find the best solution to their situation. They find answers that are not provided by those who are diminishing their lives with unfair burdens. Like God, they look at an imperfect world and they deal with it. They don't get stuck in the life ought to be fair and I'm going to sit here and demand that it is syndrome. They choose the when life is not fair, I will do everything in my power to find an answer to the problem at hand attitude. One day on our radio show, a woman called in and said that her mother had treated her miserably during the Thanksgiving holiday, and she was very angry. The caller had gone back to school and was pursuing her dreams, and her mother had criticized her for wasting time trying to improve herself. My mom was so critical, she said. She just said the meanest things like, why are you doing that? You'll never make a living in that field. You're too old for this. Why don't you just get a real job and get on with it? It was horrible. She ruined my whole holiday. Sensing that this caller was not a child, nor was this the first time that she had ever felt that, I said, that's terrible. By the way, how old are you? 40. So, this is the same mother you've had for all those 40 years? Well, of course. And is this the first time that she's ever been non-supportive or critical? Why, no. She does this all the time. She is so mean. She always ruins my plans and dreams. She's never supported me. Now, let me ask you something. What was it about this particular holiday that made you think that she was going to magically change and all of a sudden be a different person? I asked, adding gently, why did you expect that to happen? Who do you think the crazy one is here? The caller did not like my point, but she got it. Sure, her mother should be a supportive person. In a perfect world, everyone should have a supportive mother. But her mother wasn't, and everyone doesn't. So the caller was ruining her own life by dealing with it in a life should be as it ought to be manner. Instead of telling herself, my mother is not a supportive